So today, we're going to talk about a massive gamble India took. We're looking at its decision to open its doors to foreign investment after literally decades of protecting its own industries. What happens when a country of nearly 1 billion people just suddenly decides to compete with the rest of the world? Okay, let's dive into this.
And that really is the million-dollar question, right? For so long, India's government basically built a fortress around its industries, using trade barriers to keep local businesses safe from global competition. So what on earth made them tear down those walls and invite the world's biggest players to the party?
Well, it all goes back to a pretty severe economic crisis around 1991. The country was practically bankrupt, and it was clear that something drastic had to change. The government's big move was a policy shift they called Liberalization. And in simple terms, that just meant they started taking down a lot of those old trade barriers, basically telling Indian companies, all right, it's time to step into the ring and compete on the world stage.
And the logic behind this? Well, it's actually pretty fascinating. The core belief was that a healthy dose of real, intense competition would be the ultimate wake-up call. It would force Indian companies to innovate, to get better, to improve their quality, and just become more efficient, simply to survive. It was a huge bet on the idea that competition breeds excellence.
Okay, so you've decided to open up, but how do you actually get those big global companies to show up? Well, India didn't just open the door. It rolled out a massive welcome mat, complete with some very, very attractive perks designed to bring in all that foreign cash.
They basically had this three-step playbook. First, they set up what are called Special Economic Zones, SEZs for short, and these were packed with top-notch infrastructure. Think reliable power, good roads, transport, the whole shebang. Second, they offered new companies a 5-year tax holiday. And third, and this one's really crucial and pretty controversial, they allowed for flexibility in labor laws. We're definitely going to circle back to what that word flexibility really means in a bit.
Now, for the huge multinational corporations, this was like a golden ticket, right? An incredible opportunity. But for India's own massive network of small-scale industries, this new era of competition felt a whole lot different. It was a much, much harsher reality.
And this quote it hits the nail on the head. For these small producers, this wasn't some friendly competition. This was a flat-out fight for survival against global giants who had incredibly deep pockets and these massive economies of scale.
I mean, just look at the toy industry. When a flood of cheaper Chinese toys hit the market, Indian toy makers were absolutely decimated. In just a single year, they lost 70 to 80% of their market. The speed of that collapse, it's just incredible.
And it wasn't just toys. It was the same story for the folks making parts for things like TVs. All of a sudden, big companies could import components for half the price of the local ones. So for the Indian suppliers, the choice was absolutely brutal. Either slash your production and lay off your workers, or just go out of business entirely.
And you can see this pattern across the board. It wasn't just one or two sectors getting hit. From batteries and plastics to dairy products and even vegetable oil, small businesses all over the country were scrambling to compete against this wave of cheaper imports.
But look, this whole economic shift, it wasn't just about businesses and numbers on a spreadsheet. It had a profound human cost. And remember that word flexibility in the labor laws we talked about? Let's dig into what that actually meant for real people.
See, in this new hyper-competitive world, companies were desperate to cut costs. And one of the biggest costs is always labor. So instead of hiring people for permanent, year-round jobs with benefits, they started hiring what they called flexible workers. That means people were only brought on when things were super busy and then just let go. For the company, this saved a ton of money on labor costs.
And you've got to understand, we are not talking about some niche corner of the economy here. These small and medium industries employed 110 million people. That made them the second largest employer in the entire country, right behind agriculture. So when these businesses were in trouble, a huge number of jobs were on the line.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. Hey, that's just capitalism, right? Tough competition. But it's a bit more complicated than that. A lot of people argued that this competition wasn't exactly happening on a level playing field, and that was thanks to the very way global trade rules are structured.
The big argument here is that the global referee, so to speak, organizations like the World Trade Organization, the WTO, they kind of had a double standard. While developing countries like India were being pushed to tear down all their trade barriers, many developed nations got to keep theirs, especially when it came to things like giving huge subsidies to their own farmers.
And this is a perfect example of what that looks like in the real world. It's pretty wild when you see it laid out like this.
In the United States, for instance, farmers make up just 0.5% of the entire workforce, but they get these absolutely massive sums of money from the government in subsidies.
So what's the result of all that? Well, it has a massive ripple effect. Those subsidies mean that U.S. farmers can sell their products on the global market for incredibly, abnormally low prices. And that makes it almost impossible for farmers in developing countries who don't have that kind of government support to even stand a chance.
So where does that leave us? India's big gamble on globalization, on foreign direct investment, it definitely brought new technology, new products, and a lot of investment. But as we've seen, it also created real, genuine hardship for a lot of small businesses and workers. It leaves us with a pretty tough question, doesn't it? When we talk about progress, how do we balance the benefits with the costs? And who gets to decide who pays that price?